The veil between worlds, in the vast tapestry of human existence, the invisible threads connecting our consciousness to the universe often remain unperceived by the inattentive eye. Carl Jung, in his exploration of the depths of the psyche, recognized that the cosmos communicates with us through a symbolic language, a language that resonates not only with our conscious mind, but with the deepest layers of the collective unconscious. Like ancient mariners navigating by stars invisible during daylight, we move through life guided by forces we seldom acknowledge. The modern mind, trapped in the sterile confines of rationalism, has forgotten the art of listening to the whispers that emerge from the spaces between thoughts. We have constructed elaborate defenses against the numinous, against the mysterious currents that flow beneath the surface of ordinary reality. Yet despite our resistance, the universe continues its patient communication, sending ripples across the pond of consciousness, inviting us to recognize the profound interconnectedness that lies at the heart of existence. Spiritual signs are not mere coincidences or superstitions, as many hastily conclude. They are, in fact, manifestations of synchronicity, that a causal connecting principle that Jung identified as a bridge between the physical and psychic realms. To ignore these signs is to close one's eyes to a map that the universe draws before us, guiding us along paths of individuation and self-discovery. It is to remain a fragment when wholeness beckons. The symbolic language through which the universe speaks operates on multiple levels simultaneously, much like dreams that contain both personal associations and universal archetypes. These communications bypass the critical faculty of the rational mind, speaking directly to that part of us that remembers our connection to the greater whole. They are reminiscent of the alchemical texts that Jung studied so deeply, coded messages that reveal their meaning only to those willing to engage with them symbolically rather than literally. When the veil between worlds grows thinner, 3 specific manifestations emerge as beacons in the darkness of unconsciousness. These signs, when recognized and honored, have the power to transform our inner journey, revealing aspects of ourselves that remained dormant in the shadows of the psyche. They serve as thresholds, liminal spaces, where the known and unknown meet, where the mundane and the sacred intertwine in a dance of meaning. The first sign, the dance of repeating numbers. The first sign manifests through what many consider a simple mathematical coincidence, the repetition of specific numbers in our daily experience. 11:11 on the clock, the number 333 appearing on car plates, addresses, or receipts. Jung would recognize this phenomenon not as statistical chance, but as a manifestation of the synchronistic principle that interweaves external events with internal psychic states. These numerical patterns represent moments when the archetypal realm imprints itself upon the material world, creating bridges of meaning across seemingly disparate domains. When numbers dance repeatedly before our eyes, they function as portals, momentary openings through which the collective unconscious whispers its truths. Each number carries its own archetypal energy, its own symbolic meaning, rooted in the most ancient human traditions, from Pythagorean numerology to Eastern mathematical systems. The number 1 speaks of unity and beginnings, 2 of duality and partnership, 3 of synthesis and creativity, 4 of structure and foundation. In their repetition, these numbers amplify their essential qualities, demanding recognition from our conscious mind. The significance lies not in the number itself, but in the resonance it evokes within us. When a number repeats insistently in your life, it is not merely a statistical event. It is a call to pay attention to the present moment, an invitation to recognize that consciousness and matter are intertwined in ways that transcend our rational understanding. To ignore this sign is to miss the opportunity to recognize the meaningful patterns emerging from the apparent chaos of existence. In his work with patients, Jung observed that numbers often appeared at crucial junctures in the individuation process. Those moments when the psyche is poised for transformation. The ancient Pythagoreans understood this profound connection between number and meaning, treating mathematics not merely as a tool for calculation, but as a sacred language that revealed the underlying structure of reality. In our modern world, we have stripped numbers of their symbolic dimension, reducing them to mere quantities. Yet the psyche continues to use them as qualitative symbols, especially in those boundary experiences where consciousness encounters something greater than itself. Consider the individual who, during a period of profound questioning, repeatedly encounters the number 4 on clocks, in addresses, in random page numbers. In Jungian terms, this might reflect the psyche's movement toward wholeness, the quaternity being a symbol of completion, or it might signify the need to establish greater psychological structure during a time of transition. The number serves not as a prediction or command, but as a reflective surface, a mirror showing the individual what is already unfolding within their psyche, but has not yet been consciously recognized. The second sign. The winged messengers. The second sign manifests through unexpected encounters with winged creatures, birds, butterflies, insects that cross our path in moments of psychological significance. Jung would observe that these encounters represent more than simple biological coincidences. They are expressions of the anima mundi, the world's soul, that manifests through the living forms inhabiting our planet. These winged beings serve as emissaries between realms, their flight symbolizing the movement between different levels of consciousness. Throughout human history, winged creatures have occupied a special place in our symbolic imagination. From the eagle of Zeus to the ravens of Odin, from the hummingbirds of Aztec mythology to the cranes of East Asian tradition, these beings have been recognized as messengers between heaven and earth. Their ability to traverse different elements, to walk upon the earth, swim in water in some cases, and soar through the air, makes them natural symbols of psychological transcendence, of the soul's capacity to move between different states, of being the butterfly that lands on your shoulder during a moment of existential contemplation, the raven that appears repeatedly in periods of personal transformation, the night moth that persistently beats against your window. All are hierophanies, manifestations of the sacred in the profane world. These winged creatures function as messengers between realms, living symbols of the metamorphosis process occurring in the depths of the psyche. Their appearance in our conscious experience represents what Jung might call synchronistic events, meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by conventional causality, but reveal the underlying patterns connecting psyche and matter. In analytical psychology, these encounters often correlate with periods of significant psychological development. The butterfly, with its profound metamorphosis from crawling caterpillar to winged beauty, naturally symbolizes the transformation that occurs through psychological integration. When it appears at a moment of personal crisis or growth, it serves as both reflection and promise, mirroring the transformation already underway in the psyche while gesturing toward its completion. The hawk, with its sharp vision and hunting prowess, might appear during periods when one needs greater psychological discernment, the ability to see clearly what has been hidden. To ignore these winged messengers is to refuse the invitation to transcendence, to the soul's flight toward new heights of understanding and psychic integration. It is to remain earthbound when the psyche is ready to soar, to reject the wisdom that comes through embodied symbolism rather than abstract thought. The appearance of these creatures in moments of significance represents the psyche's attempt to communicate through the language of living symbols, a language that speaks simultaneously to our primal instincts and our highest aspirations. The third sign, the echo of dreams in reality. The third and perhaps most profound sign manifests when elements from our night dreams begin to emerge in waking reality. An object, a phrase, a situation that seems to echo directly from the depths of our unconscious into the fabric of everyday reality. This interpenetration of dreaming and waking consciousness represents what Jung called the transcendent function in its most dramatic form, the direct communication between different levels of psychic reality. Jung dedicated much of his life to understanding the relationship between dreams and waking consciousness, recognizing that dreams are not merely random neural firings, but meaningful communications from the deeper self. When dream elements cross the threshold into conscious reality, we experience what Jung might call a living symbol, a dynamic intersection of inner and outer worlds that carries transformative potential. These moments reveal the artificial nature of the boundary we maintain between subjective and objective experience, between inner vision and outer perception. Perhaps you dream of a peculiar blue feather, only to find that very feather on your morning walk, or you dream of a forgotten childhood melody, only to hear it playing in a store you randomly enter. Perhaps a dream conversation with a figure you've never met is echoed almost verbatim by a stranger you encounter the following day. These occurrences are not mere coincidences, but synchronistic events that signal the alignment of your conscious journey with the deeper currents of your psyche. They are moments when the artificial divisions between dreaming and waking consciousness temporarily dissolve, revealing the continuous nature of psychic experience. In his clinical work, Jung observed that these dream reality echoes often occurred during pivotal moments in the individuation process, times when the psyche is working to overcome fragmentation and move toward greater wholeness. They represent what he called meaningful coincidences, events connected not by causality but by the shared meaning that underlies them. This meaning is not arbitrary or subjective, but emerges from the deeper patterns that structure both psyche and cosmos, what Jung referred to as archetypes of the collective unconscious. To ignore these echoes is to miss the opportunity for psychological integration, for healing the split between conscious and unconscious that Jung identified as the source of modern humanity's spiritual malaise. It is to perpetuate the fragmentation that characterizes the modern psyche, the division between thinking and feeling, between intuition and sensation, between personal identity and transpersonal meaning. The dream echo offers a glimpse of what an integrated consciousness might look like, one in which the various aspects of the self work in harmony rather than opposition. The shadow of dismissal. What happens when we ignore these three signs? Jung would suggest that we encounter what he called the shadow, those rejected, disowned aspects of ourselves that, when unacknowledged, manifest as psychological symptoms or projected negativity. The shadow of dismissal is particularly insidious because it masquerades as rationality, as mature skepticism, as scientific thinking. It tells us that meaning is merely subjective, that patterns are merely coincidental, that the mysterious is merely the not yet explained. The dismissal of synchronistic events reinforces the modern ego's dangerous illusion of separateness, the notion that consciousness is isolated from the fabric of reality, that the self is disconnected from the cosmos. This dismissal perpetuates what Jung called the sickness of dissociation, the fragmentation of the psyche that characterizes much of modern psychological suffering. In our determined rejection of the numinous, we impoverish our experience, confining ourselves to a mechanistic universe devoid of inherent meaning. When we rationalize away numerical synchronicities as just coincidence, when we reduce meaningful animal encounters to random biological events, when we dismiss the appearance of dream elements in waking life as mere chance, we strengthen the barriers between consciousness and the unconscious. These barriers, Jung warned, do not protect us, but rather imprison us in a diminished state of being, cut off from the wisdom and healing power of the deeper self. This dismissal operates through various psychological mechanisms. Intellectualization transforms the living symbol into a dead concept, stripping it of emotional resonance and transformative potential. Projection locates the meaning-making function entirely outside the self, attributing it to superstition or wishful thinking in others, while failing to recognize the same patterns in one's own experience. Repression pushes the awareness of meaningful connections below the threshold of consciousness, where they continue to influence behavior without the benefit of conscious integration. The price of this dismissal is paid in the currency of meaning, a spiritual poverty that manifests as the epidemic of purposelessness and disconnection so prevalent in our technological age. Without access to the symbolic dimension of experience, we are left with what Jung called the wasteland, a psychological landscape characterized by alienation, materialism, and spiritual hunger. The soul, deprived of its natural food, attempts to satisfy itself with poor substitutes, addiction, consumerism, ideological extremism, that provide temporary relief but ultimately deepen the underlying emptiness. The path of integration, how? Then do we honor these signs when they appear? Jung would advocate for a stance of active imagination, a conscious dialogue with the unconscious contents that manifest through synchronistic events. This approach requires neither blind belief nor cynical dismissal, but rather a third path, curious engagement with the patterns that emerge in our experience. It involves developing what Jung called symbolic thinking, the capacity to perceive both the literal and metaphorical dimensions of reality simultaneously. When repeating numbers appear, pause and reflect on the moment. What thoughts were present? What emotions were stirring? The number itself is less important than its function as a mirror for your current psychological state. Record these occurrences in a journal, looking for patterns not just in the numbers themselves, but in the contexts of their appearance. Over time, you may discover that certain numbers correlate with specific psychological states or life transitions. 4 appearing during periods of structuring and organization, 3 during times of creative synthesis, 7 during moments of deeper spiritual connection. This journaling practice represents what Jung called active imagination, a conscious engagement with unconscious material that allows it to unfold its meaning more fully. By externalizing these experiences through writing, drawing, or other creative expressions, we create a container for their energy, preventing it from remaining unconscious where it might manifest as psychological symptoms. The journal becomes a vessel for the alchemical process Jung identified in the individuation journey, a place where raw psychic material can be transformed into psychological insight. When winged messengers cross your path, consider the symbolic qualities traditionally associated with that creature. The owl brings wisdom, the butterfly transformation, the hawk perspective. How might these qualities relate to your current life journey? What aspect of your own nature might be seeking expression through this encounter? Again, record not just the encounter itself, but the psychological context in which it occurred, the questions you were pondering, the challenges you were facing, the emotions you were experiencing. Through this active engagement with synchronistic phenomena, we participate in what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's natural movement toward wholeness, integration, and expanded consciousness. We become conscious collaborators in our own individuation process, rather than passive subjects of unconscious forces. The synchronistic event becomes not just something that happens to us, but something we participate in, a dialogue between different aspects of the self, mediated through external reality. The alchemical transformation Jung found in alchemy, a powerful metaphor for the psychological transformation that occurs when we attend to the subtle signs of the unconscious. The alchemist's work of transmuting base metals into gold parallels our own potential to transform unconscious content into conscious wisdom. The laboratory of the alchemist becomes a symbol for the container of consciousness in which psychological transformation occurs, the attentive awareness that allows raw experience to be refined into insight. The three signs we have explored function as alchemical catalysts, agents of transformation that, when properly engaged, accelerate our psychological development. They create what the alchemists called the vas hermeticum, the sealed vessel in which transformation becomes possible. Without this container, the focused attention that recognizes and values synchronistic events, the subtle energies of transformation dissipate, leaving the psyche unchanged. Repeating numbers create the prima materia, the initial awareness that there might be more to reality than meets the rational eye. They establish the fundamental recognition that consciousness and matter are not entirely separate domains, but aspects of a unified reality. This recognition creates the conditions for what the alchemists called the nigredo, the initial stage of the work in which fixed beliefs about reality begin to dissolve, creating space for new understanding. Winged messengers facilitate the solutio, the dissolution of rigid ego structures that prevent deeper understanding. Their appearance challenges the boundary between self and other, between human consciousness and the wider intelligence of nature. This dissolution creates the conditions for what the alchemists called the albedo, the whitening or purification in which new insight begins to emerge from the dissolution of old patterns. The encounter with the winged being washes away habitual perception, revealing the symbolic dimension of existence that typically remains hidden. Dream echoes in waking life enable the coagulatio, the solidification of new, more integrated psychological structures. When dream and waking reality interpenetrate, the artificial boundary between conscious and unconscious begins to dissolve, allowing for greater integration of previously split-off aspects of the self. This integration creates the conditions for what the alchemists called the rubedo, the reddening or final stage in which the transformed consciousness embodies itself in concrete life, manifesting as changed behavior, perception, and relationship. Through this alchemical lens, synchronistic events become not just interesting anomalies, but crucial components of a sacred process, the opus magnum, or great work of becoming fully human. Each acknowledged sign contributes to the philosopher's stone of the individuated self, that integrated consciousness that Jung saw as the goal of human development. The philosopher's stone represents not immortality in the literal sense, but psychological wholeness, the state in which the various aspects of the self work in harmony rather than opposition, in which conscious and unconscious collaborate rather than conflict. The eternal conversation in the final analysis, these three signs, repeating numbers, winged messengers, and dream echoes, represent facets of an ongoing dialogue between consciousness and the greater reality from which it emerges. Jung would view this dialogue not as supernatural or paranormal, but as entirely natural, a reflection of the psyche's inherent connection to the fabric of existence itself. What appears as extraordinary or mysterious is simply the manifestation of dimensions of reality that our habitual perception typically filters out. The universe, in Jung's understanding, is not a dead mechanism, but a living reality infused with the same consciousness that animates our own being. The signs we have explored are moments when this greater consciousness breaks through our habitual perception, reminding us that we participate in a reality far more mysterious and meaningful than our rational minds can comprehend. They are invitations to what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship, an encounter with reality as presence rather than object, as living participant rather than inert material. To honor these signs is not to retreat into superstition, but to advance into a more complete understanding of consciousness, one that integrates rational knowledge with intuitive wisdom, scientific observation with symbolic understanding, personal awareness with collective insight. It is to develop what Owen Barfield called final participation, a mode of consciousness that combines the analytical clarity of modern thought with the participatory awareness of earlier modes of perception. This integrated consciousness perceives both the objective structures of reality and the meanings that animate them, both the outer forms of things and their inner significance. In a world increasingly dominated by technological rationality and materialistic reductionism, the capacity to recognize and respond to these subtle communications from the deeper self may be not just psychologically beneficial, but evolutionarily essential. For as Jung reminds us, it is not through the conquest of nature, but through the integration of consciousness that humanity finds its true destiny. The symbolic language of synchronicity serves as a corrective to the one-sidedness of modern consciousness, its tendency to value the measurable over the meaningful, the controllable over the mysterious, the explained over the experienced. The three signs, properly understood, are not esoteric curiosities but vital communications in the eternal conversation between the known and the unknown, the visible and the invisible, the conscious and the unconscious. A conversation in which each of us, whether we recognize it or not, is always already engaged. They remind us that we are not isolated observers of reality, but participants in its unfolding, not separate minds in an alien universe, but expressions of a consciousness that permeates all that is. This participation changes everything. The world is no longer a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. Events are no longer merely causal sequences, but meaningful patterns. Life is no longer merely biological survival, but spiritual adventure. As we learn to recognize and respond to the subtle signs that surround us, we discover that we have never been alone, that we are held within a universe that speaks to us through the language of meaningful coincidence, through the poetry of synchronicity, through the quiet whispers that emerge in the spaces between thoughts.